Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and I hope you like spreadsheet videos because we got another one of those here. So originally I was planning to do this video with the 3950X, except AMD decided that they're not going to release a 3950X in September, but they're going to delay it because apparently there is no shortage of 8-core chiplets, but that's why they announced a CPU that uses 4 6-core chiplets, right? Like the Threadripper 3 CPU is like I know AMD has made and TSMC have made statements like there's no supply problem, and it's just like, yeah, but there is a demand problem. You don't have as many 8-core chiplets as people want to buy, which is why you're announcing a 24-core Threadripper, which obviously uses 6-core chiplets, not 8-core chiplets, right? If it was using 8-core chiplets, it would be a 32-core. Well, actually, no. If they had but like you could technically do like 3 8-core CCDs, but I'm pretty sure that doesn't work. So anyway, because 3 times 8 is like the other way to get 24, but that's not likely. So anyway, yeah, I was planning to do this with a 3950X, but unfortunately, like, I need to get videos about, like, BIOSes done, and so it was just like, okay, I need to overclock the CPU so that at least I can explain if any of the features in the BIOS are actually useful. No, they're not. No, seriously, it's just like with these CPUs, there is no point at all doing anything other than maxing out the PBO limits. Because you change the scaler, nothing happens, right? Like, yeah, like, so, yeah, and I tested Cinebench R15, R20. Like, the R20 is for the high thread count test because R20 is a longer workload. R15 is for the low thread count test because it's a shorter workload. Yeah, so that's the two tests I ran. There's an issue of with 8 and 12 thread, the performance is really variable because it depends where the Windows decides to throw the threads on, which is how you have results like this, where like auto does really well in 12T, but then so 1x scaler does great in 12T, then 4x scaler doesn't do so great in 12T. Minus 25 millivolts doesn't do so great. Minus 50 millivolts doesn't do so great. Minus 75 still doesn't match 1x. Then this result randomly, also does pretty well. Then 7x scaler does terrible. 4x scaler here does, what is that? Oh, that's with extra voltage. That does terrible. Doesn't do great. Then 4x scaler with BCO 50 megahertz does okay, but it's just like, okay, well, cool. So does BCO actually do anything? Well, no, because BCO 100 at 10x scaler is just like basically the score goes up and down by some 50, 100 close to 100, like almost 100 points at random. It's like plus minus 80 points on that score. Actually, no, I think if you averaged it out, yeah, I should take an average of all those results, all of the non-BCLK results. So that's the thing, is like tweaking the scaler does nothing. The performance doesn't change. You tweak the BCO, it does nothing. Like the boost clock override setting has about as much impact on your performance as the NVIDIA voltage slider has on overclocking modern NVIDIA cards. It makes you feel good about the fact that you can change a number. It has no impact on anything whatsoever. No performance gains, no nothing. It does nothing. Actually, the NVIDIA voltage slider does actually have an impact. It's just that most people aren't at low enough temperatures for the voltage slider to do anything. So it's kind of the thing. Is like you need to have the GPU at like below 30 degrees Celsius for that slider to actually have an impact. But anyway... the scaler and the BCO setting on at least the Godlike, maybe this changes with motherboards, because at least with the 2700X, I definitely had more success overclocking it on Gigabyte more success fiddling with the boost algorithm on Gigabyte motherboards than on any other motherboard I tested. That still doesn't change the fact that it was an incredible hassle, and at most I got like a couple percentage points worth of performance, and it was just not worth it at the end of the day. Anyway, with MSI motherboards, you're basically just max out the PBO limits, set whatever random scaler you feel like, offsetting the voltage. So interesting thing, the offset voltage actually does lower your operating voltage. It just has no impact on performance. So it's just like, it does slightly reduce your power consumption. But the thing is, when I say slightly, I mean slightly, because here's the thing. 1.4 volts, right? Compared to... So if you square, like, power consumption scales quadratically with voltage. So if you want to do a comparison between like 1.4 volts and 1.35 volts, well, 1.4 volts gives us a like 1.96 power, 1.96 times the power consumption, and 1.35 volts gives us 1.35, right, gives us 1.8225 divided by 1.96. Oh, you save about 7%. Yeah. If the CPU pulled 100 watts at 1.4 volts, then at 1.35 volts, it'll pull 93. Great. Awesome. Now, I'm not saying that, yeah, you can still definitely tweak the offset the voltage a little bit, but I'm just saying it doesn't gain you any performance. It doesn't really have a whole lot of impact on your power consumption either. It will lower your temperatures a bit. So, maybe for just peace of mind, like there's not really any harm in doing it. It just doesn't really do anything. And there's a small chance that you'll run into instability. At minus 100 millivolts, the system is literally, like my system is literally unable to get into Windows because it's just too little voltage. But anything above that basically worked. It's just that even though it worked, it just didn't have any performance impact. It did lead to lower operating voltages, but no performance impact. So that's a big change from second gen, because on the second generation of Ryzen CPUs, if you maxed out your PBO limits, you could lower you could offset your core voltage. And because the CPU, I think basically what's happened is on second gen, if you offset the voltage, the CPU would think that it's getting whatever voltage it's asking for, but it would be running at a lower temperature and a lower current. So it would go, hey, I have, temperature and current headroom, so I can run a higher frequency. Except with third gen, AMD seems to have fixed whatever was causing that. So now, if you offset the voltage, it doesn't do anything, which is just like awesome. Love you, AMD. I don't know why. Like, I feel like, honestly, if the 3700X just behaved like a 2700X, this would actually have some impact, but no. No, it doesn't. So this is great. Yeah. Though, so, yeah, it's just like offsetting the voltage. It'll save you some power. It makes no difference to your performance, and that's kind of that. So, there's no harm in doing it, but the scaler doesn't do anything, right? I've tried 4x scaler. No, like, the thing is like, you may notice that these test results aren't super methodical, but the thing is, I was basically trying to quickly find something that gives me like a drastic performance increase, and I never found anything like that, right? Except like BCLK overclocking, which is how we have the highest single-threaded result over here, and here, and then like the low thread count results. Like basically, this is I should just drag this over. Bam, delete those. So these are basically like the highest results in each chart. And that's that 210. You might be like, ooh, how did you get 210? Oh, by running the entire chip at 4.45 gigahertz and maxing out the voltage and setting the voltage to 1.5. Yeah, that's how you get 210. So, yeah, my chip is evidently not capable of more than 4.4 gigahertz on one core. I mean, AMD bins these to 4.4 gigahertz max boost, so that kind of makes sense. Even though on average, the performance, like single-threaded performance in Cinebench, is more reflective of an average frequency of about 4.35 gigahertz, right? Like 4.35 gigahertz static runs 204. Most of these results hover around 204, probably because the boost algorithm doesn't sit at 4.4 gigahertz, which is how it behaved even on a 2700X. My 2700X, for example, doesn't hold... Like, it doesn't even hold 4.3 gigahertz in Cinebench. Like, it drops slightly below that. So, it's like, I'm not surprised by the results here. It's just like, I was really hoping there was some way to get the CPU to boost higher. But maybe there's people with CPUs who don't need so much freaking voltage for 4.45 gigahertz, right? Like, your chip might be able to run 4.45 at 1.45 mode for LLC. In which case, you might actually be able to get better single-threaded performance with like the BCO or whatever, but yeah, my chip might just have trash silicon, as is the norm for me, which I mean, it needs a lot of voltage for just 4.2 gigahertz. So yeah. In fact, my 3700X seems to have the exact same voltage behavior as my 2700X, which is like awesome. Right? Like, great. That's exactly what I need. Actually, yeah, it does. Because even my max frequency on my 2700X, like, I never got that chip past 4.45 ever. Like, there was nothing I could do to get it past 4.45. So yeah, that's great. I like my still the performance is a lot higher. It's just like the frequency behavior is identical to my 2700X experience. So yeah, great. That's some progress right there. But still, so you know, it's just like, yeah, the chip basically hovers around 4.35 gigahertz for single threaded. And there's nothing you can do about that. Like, at least for me, there was absolutely nothing I could do about that. I could mess with BCO. I could mess with BCLK, and that would bump it up to about 207, which is equivalent to about 4.4 gigahertz. So, yeah, that's, yeah, but you need BCLK to do that. And the issue with BCLK overclocking is, and even 101 BCLK was sometimes capable of doing that, but I had to bump up the voltage. And the funny thing is if you raise the voltage, so I raised the voltage because I was thinking, okay, so if lowering the voltage doesn't make it boost higher, what if I gave the chip more voltage? Would it notice that it's getting more voltage and then boost higher? Because Vega, for example, actually does that. Like Vega GPUs, if you raise their core voltage, they will automatically raise their core clock, which is just like, as far as I'm concerned, that's like the stupidest thing I've ever seen, but they do that. So I was thinking, hey, maybe Ryzen does that. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Well, maybe it does for single-threaded, but by the time you get into 16-core, like this bounces off the thermal and power limit, and so having plus 25 millivolts just sort of, well, actually, that's still within margin of error, right? Because 5,000, if you're doing 5,000 points, plus minus 50 is 1%. So for Cinebench, that's margin of error. So yeah, 4987 right there is just like, okay, so that's not great. 404 on that. 1537. So yeah, BCLK overclocking is like one of the few ways that you can actually get decent performance improvements, but even then it's like not worth it. So this column right over here, these results are literally just like, if I click one of these, it literally just adds up these these 5 results right here. So, you know, for quick comparisons. So we can clearly see that basically, like, if you don't have PBO enabled, you know, you get like 11,500, right? And you actually lose score as you increase memory clock because the memory controller starts chewing up some of the power budget that the CPU uses. So that's why you lose a little bit of performance with memory overclocking. But once you max out, like once you basically enable PBO and max out the limits, as well as throw literally any scalar value at it, the performance doesn't change. On average, it just sits at 11,900 points, plus minus 100, right? Which is like 1%. So margin of error. And yeah, so, you know, because we have 11,883, we have 11,894, 11,845, 11,841, 11,980, right? So this one's pretty high. Oh, wait, it has one of the lowest single thread, like it has a pretty low single threaded. And really, this one's just kind of being carried by its anomalously high 8 thread and 16 thread, and its 12 thread it's okay, 12 thread, but yeah, it's not really doing that great. And then this one's actually, well, no, it's not even that low because it's about the same as this one right here, which is 1x scalar, right? So yeah, and then we have this one over here, which is 11,791. So actually increasing the voltage does seem to probably lower your performance like an actual measurable amount just because it starts the thermal throttle and power throttle a bit more. But after that, you know, we go back to like normal things like auto voltage and 7x scalar, and we get 11,875 again. Yay! And then BCO 11,942, so that's lower than a result of minus 75 millivolts, which like it's worthless. And then down here we have some more results. So here we have 7x scalar plus BCO 100, which gives us on auto voltage. So that gives us 11,912. Then I tried, well, what if we had static voltage but with LLC to you know, crank the voltage up and down based on how many threads are loaded. I think this one really overshot it because we can see that the multi-threaded performance is down, so it's probably thermal or power throttling. So that's why that one's bad. But here you can see that basically, you know, I crank up the LLC and the multi-threaded performance basically gets back up to stock levels, so it doesn't actually improve, and single-threaded performance is the same as everywhere else. Of course it is. Here we have an 948, and then we have another 11795, 11794, 11901, 11908, 11859. So basically, out of like all of these settings I tested, score the same. Right? Isn't that great? And then there's the BCLK results, which are like the only results in this entire bloody chart that managed to breach the 12,000 barrier, ignoring the 4.2 gigahertz all-core overclock, which really just gets carried by its high multi-threaded results, right? Because, yeah, that's... It just crushes the multi-threaded scores. So, yeah, and the highest single-threaded score belongs to the 101.8 megahertz BCLK overclock, because of course it does. So yeah, I mean, and the best part is like the difference between the highest result in this entire, like 1200, yeah. So the best result, which is that 101 BCLK over here with the 4x scaler, right? Which gives us a 12057, percentage wise, the difference between that and stock is... Which stock, well, okay, let's take stock with like overclocked memory, right? So 490, about 4.9%. Great. Awesome. And compared to like, you know, compared to like 1x scalar, it's actually like, it basically doesn't make a difference because you take that, compare it to 1x scalar, which is that result over there. That's the 11... Yeah, that one. 883. Oh, about 1.4%. Yay! All like the difference between all of these results is basically margin of error. Like that's the main issue I have with it. Is like, so, you know, if you want to overclock your Ryzen 3rd gen on an MSI motherboard, what you should do is you should max out your PBO limits, throw whatever random scaler you feel like throwing at it, because as far as I can tell, that the scaler setting, like on 2nd gen CPUs, it would actually adjust how much voltage you were getting quite drastically. But yeah, on 3rd gen, it doesn't actually seem to do any of that. So... yeah, like set whatever random scalar value you want. Just for peace of mind, you should probably stick with the lower ones, even though I really didn't notice. Like, I had an oscilloscope hooked up to the motherboard the entire time, so I wouldn't have to use the multimeter. I was using the like voltage probe points of the motherboard, which seemed to have a filter on them, so it's not like I was seeing transients or anything. Or actually, I wasn't even able to see like the really fast power management. I was getting like average, like it was averaging the voltage really hard. The probe point was, not the oscilloscope. But anyway, I think there's probably like a capacitor somewhere on that, like on the probe, like the connection, the wires going to the probe point, like wherever that's measuring from. There's probably a capacitor sitting on it. So yeah, it just flattens out the voltage. Anyway, the thing is basically like, I didn't notice any changes in voltage with the different scalars. It was always pretty much the same. So yeah, you know, if you like, for me, I would probably max out the PBO limits instead of 5x scalar, because 5 is my favorite number. Out of like single digit numbers, 5 is my favorite number. Yeah, I'd throw a 5x at it and call it a day, because doing anything, and you know, maybe a minus 50 millivolt offset. Because doing anything else doesn't actually do anything. Isn't that great? Because the BCLK, like this is just asking for trouble, because it screws with PCIe, it screws with SATA, it's really like, it screws with your memory, it screws with so many things at the same time that, like, if you're doing competitive overclocking, it makes sense to mess with BCLK. But for day-to-day usage, is like, do you like M.2 SSDs? Well, don't use BCLK, because there's a pretty good chance your M.2 SSD will stop being detected. Or it might even corrupt it, which is like the Like that there's like it is possible for that to actually happen, that you'll corrupt the M.2 SSD by BCLK overclocking. I think you can even corrupt SATA drives with BCLK overclocking. So yeah, that's kind of the thing, is just like BCLK is like nice on paper and then not really something you actually want to use. It's a real shame that AMD doesn't have BCLK split like Intel does. But anyway, so yeah, it's just like BCLK does actually give you a bit more single-threaded performance, but it has no impact. But it's just, well, no, it gives you a bit, not no impact, but it's just super sketchy as far as I'm concerned. And it's still like a 1%, or, you know, it's a couple percentage points worth of gain. And it's just like, yeah, no, that's completely worthless. So yeah, that's kind of that. Anyway, for my CPU, I also created this little chart basically comparing like how PBO behaves compared to auto, and also like what I think the CPU could probably do. So it's worth noting that this chart is frequencies, but it's not based on like a hardware info readout. It's based on the score that I was getting with a static clock speed. So basically what I did for that is like let's say the point right here, which is 4.15, right, for PBO. So PBO on average will score 16 thread like it's running 4.15, because if we look at 4.15 here, we get about 5,029. And if we look at our PBO results, we see 5,013, 5,004, slightly under 5,000, 5,031. Actually, it should be probably like 41.25. Then here we have a 5,010, 5,014, right? So down here we have a 5,017, 49, like all of these, right? These are like low 5,000s. So actually, you know, the equivalent frequency would not be 4.15. It would be more like 4.125 there. So more like that. Yeah, so that's kind of how I created this curve, like this line right here, where it's like, okay, so at this many threads, it performs like it was running at this frequency, not it was literally running at that frequency, because getting, you know, frequency readouts on Ryzen, not particularly, like the thing is, the Ryzen CPUs adjust their frequency so quickly, it's just like you're never really going to get a great measurement. So it's just easier to take the performance that it spits out and compare it to compare that to the frequency necessary to get that score. Right, like if that makes any sense, because if it's matching that kind of, like, that's probably the average frequency it's running at, even though it's going to be obviously boosting above that and under that as well. So that's kind of the funny part. It's just like, yeah, it performs like that would be what it would perform like if that was a static overclock. Anyway, so and I basically did that for most of the points, and they're not super accurate because, well, in like biases. Like, I think, like, this result where it's, like, 4.25, which that's for the 8 threads, isn't it? Yeah, that's for 8 threads. So 4.25 8 threads is 1527, which, actually, yeah, PBO, well, it can do 1551 sometimes. So, yeah, that's, I guess, where that got 4.25 from. Because, yeah, 1520. Yeah, makes sense. So, pretty happy with that. And then, of course, auto settings was running like 1516s, which is just like, okay, that's slightly below that. So that's around sort of closer to that 4.2 mark. And again, like the thing is the 8 thread and the 12 thread test are super dependent on the Windows scheduler as far as I'm concerned, because they're just really inconsistent in general. So that makes those kind of annoying. But basically, you know, when it comes to 1 thread performance, I measured no improvement with PBO over auto. Right, like auto gets 205 right there. It gets 203. It gets 202, and that's with really bad memory settings, or well, worse memory settings. And then if we look at the PBO results, we see a 203, a 205, a 204, a 203, a 203, a 201, a 203. We see down here, where's more PBO? 201, 202, 203, 204, 204, 202, 201, 204. Like, it's basically hovering around 203 the entire time. Any combination of PBO settings, 203. Right, so I was like, okay, well, 203 is roughly equivalent to about 4. Well, it's actually slightly below 4.35, but hey, there's a few results where it's doing 205, so okay, let's call it a 4.35 average clock speed for 1 thread. And that just so happens to also be what the single-threaded thing does, right? Like on auto, it does that as well. So it's just like, yeah, so from auto to PBO, you see no gain in single-threaded. You see no gain in 4 threads because, again, if you look at 4-thread performance, right, you see 789, 789, 792 for the auto settings. And then when you look at PBO, you see 782, 794, 794, 789, 794, 788. Like, there's like 5 points more on PBO sometimes. And that's 790, 792, 792, 793. Oh, wait, those are the BCLK results right there. So those aren't doing that either. But anyway, that's about 4.25 is doing about 7,900, and 4.3 was doing a 796. So, you know, that's how that both of those ended up at 4.25. Because that's roughly equivalent to the kind of performance I was seeing, right? Like that's this range. So it's really more like 4.275 for both of them. Because, again, like, they're scoring right on top. Like, there's barely... Well, okay. Now, maybe PBO is doing 25 megahertz-ish more, right? So, that's the thing. Is just like... So, in low thread count workloads, PBO has little to no impact in my testing. In high thread count workloads where you're bouncing off the power limit and the temperature limit, which PBO doesn't actually change, but the power limit that you're bouncing off of, yeah, PBO fixes that. PBO basically massively increases, high thread count frequencies because that's when you're bouncing off the power limit. And guess what the maxed out PBO limits? Most of those are power limits. So, yeah. Ryzen overclocking is the equivalent of buying a GPU and just maxing out the power slider. Doing anything else doesn't do, like, you can't do anything else. There's literally, I really wish AMD gave us a offset frequency setting. Like, I wish I could take the PBO curve and move it up by 25 megahertz. Like, I think that would be really cool. But AMD didn't give us that. Instead, they gave us the boost clock override setting. And the boost clock override setting, basically think of Ryzen as having basically there's a setting on the CPU which says you will never exceed X frequency. Okay, that's it. That's all it says. It's like you will not exceed this frequency. And so for a 3700X, it says don't exceed 4.4 gigahertz. If you max out the BCO, if you set BCO to 100, you basically tell the CPU don't exceed 4.5 gigahertz. You're not actually telling the CPU to go to a higher frequency. You're just telling it not to exceed a higher frequency, which it was already not. Like basically you'd need to take a chip that was like, instead of, what we're seeing right here, I want another, I'm going to add another data set is like, BCO CPU, right? So if we had which actually, how do I add that to the chart? I'm not good at this. Add series. This range. No data. So that's going to be like, 1T would be 4.4, then 4.4 again, and then like 4.3, like some miracle CPU that basically is bouncing off the actual frequency limiter instead of the okay. Yeah. Oh, oops. Added that wrong. No. Okay, wait a minute. Remove. Add. Nope. Add those. Bam. So yeah, you'd basically have to have a frequency, like a CPU that's actually hitting the frequency limit instead of a CPU that's well below the frequency limit. Right? It's like, yeah, you can boost more. And it's just like, yeah, but I don't feel like doing that. Right? Like, that's the whole issue. The CPU doesn't want to boost more. It's just like, and AMD doesn't give you any tools to make it boost more. They just give you a bunch of down here, because here it's actually bouncing off some kind of limit, right? It's bouncing off the power limit. It's bouncing off the voltage limit. So they're maxing out the PBO limits. Yeah, that gives you more frequency. But up here, it's bouncing off of, what is it bouncing off? Probably voltage or something. Yeah, it's probably voltage limited here. So obviously raising the maximum frequency doesn't do anything when the CPU is voltage limited, right? Like, Yeah, and unfortunately also like if you increase the voltage, right, which is why I actually tried things like, positive offset voltage was like, hey, maybe it doesn't want to boost more because the voltage isn't high enough. Yeah, no, that doesn't help. so so yeah, the CPU basically at this point it's just kind of decided that yeah, I'm just not going to boost more than this and screw you, Buildzoid. So, yeah. I mean, it's really not any different from what I had with like this isn't really any different from a 2700X. But I really wish AMD just gave you a option to like I don't think that like I think the real issue is that the boost algorithm probably literally doesn't support an offset. Like you literally cannot tell the boost algorithm because basically it's like I would like you to run at 25 megahertz higher frequency without realizing it. Right? Like that's kind of and I think like that's the thing that BCLK allows you to do is because if you raise the BCLK, the CPU will just kind of be like, okay, I'm still running the same ratios, but now it's that ratio is on top of a higher BCLK, so it gives you a higher frequency. Unfortunately, on some motherboards, like, well, that's one thing with like, I need to test out the BCLK overclocking on the Gigabyte boards, the X570 Gigabyte boards, because on X470 with Gigabyte's motherboards, if you raise the BCLK, the CPU wouldn't actually notice that the BCLK was raised, which meant that it was boosting exactly the same as if the BCLK was 100, except now it was like 101 or 102, and you'd actually get more boost out of it, which was really, like, that was really cool. But yeah, with this MSI board, that effect, like, I don't know if, like, maybe it's fixed, like, maybe that doesn't work anymore, because on Asus motherboards, that never worked. Like, on Asus motherboards, you had to jump through all kinds of hoops to get that behavior, but on Gigabyte boards, you just raise the BCLK at stock settings and you'd get more boost. And on this motherboard, yeah, that doesn't work. So... Well, no, it seems to work a little bit, right? Because here, like 207, that's equivalent to 4.4. And, we raised the frequency by about, a little over 1%. So, 4.35 divided by 4.4. 4.4 divided by 4.35. Right? That's a little over 1%. So it makes sense that we get 207 when you raise the BCLK. So it is kind of doing that, but it's not doing it as much as I'd like it to do it. Like, it's not doing it as much as I want. So yeah, I think I really need to test another motherboard. But at least on MSI, it seems like don't bother. Like, absolutely don't bother with anything more than just maxing out PBO and the scaler. Also, MSI's PBO presets kind of suck. Right? Like 200, 201, 202, 199. Like, these are some of the worst single-threaded results in this entire chart. They could be margin of error, but I really, really doubt it. So, yeah, and the multi-threaded results are okay-ish, but not great. So, yeah. And BCO is a placebo setting. Doesn't do anything. So, yeah. I'm really like... I'm not so like I'm disappointed. I'm not surprised because this was roughly what I was. Well, I'm surprised that this doesn't work. I was really hoping this would work. I was really hoping that, messing with the BCLK would have more impact, but I don't know what I expected because when you barely, like, if you raise the frequency by 2%, right? If you raise the BCLK by 2%, you really can't be expecting more than a 2% increase in performance. So maybe if I reran this test a few times, it would have maybe inched its way up to like 208 or 209. And maybe this one would have inched its way up to 205. Because the thing is, again, there's variance based on which... Because the issue is, like, there's, like, certain cores on the CPU boost differently compared to other cores because some cores are better than other cores. So if that one thread of Cinebench ran on the crappy core during that test, then it's just like, yeah, it'll score a bit lower. If it ran on the best core, it'll score a bit higher. Awesome. It's just like, man... Yeah, so that's kind of the results. Is just like, yeah, if you want to max out your Ryzen 3rd gen performance, just set the scale, like max out the PBO limits, max out the scaler, don't do anything else. Well, maybe run a 25, 50 millivolt offset. I wouldn't run a higher one because it will cause instability if you set it high enough, right? So if you don't want to push your luck, just set a very little offset. Also, I have heard some reports that apparently negative voltage offset cost performance, but I mean, and right, like this result, like is one of the best I have. So I don't know. Maybe my system is just weird that it doesn't happen to me, but yeah, I have heard some reports that negative offsets cause performance loss, but I'm not seeing that. I'm just seeing no performance gain, which is, in my opinion, which sucks because my 2700X would actually pick up frequency as you lowered the voltage. Because the thing is, like, what would happen is the boost algorithm would be feeding, like, way more voltage into the chip than was absolutely necessary. So it would hit the power, like, it would bounce off the thermal limit or the power limit, and then it would, you know, boost less. So if you gave it a negative offset, then it would be like, oh, look, we have thermal and power headroom. Let's boost more. But, yeah, basically overclocking boost CPUs through the boost system is like herding cats. Anyway, also, but basically with the negative offsets, you might want to do your own performance checks. Maybe my CPU is a bit of an anomaly in that it doesn't lose performance, but I only have one CPU, so that's kind of the thing. Anyway, yeah, that's Ryzen 3rd gen overclock. Like, that's my experience with 3rd gen overclocking on MSI motherboards with the ABBA BIOS and the 1903 Windows. So now I just need to do the same stuff on Gigabyte. Yay! This took like a day. And there's no stability testing in any of this. Like, that's the best part. It's just like, this takes forever because, and it's just like, well, the thing is my outlook on stability testing this is just like, well, if you're not picking up any performance, why would you be even worried about the stability? Like, do I care if this is stable or not? No, because it's not even that much faster anyway. And actually, it's not stable. I know it's not stable because it crashed in freaking IDA. Like, if you crash in IDA, your stability kind of sucks. Okay, actually, not kind of sucks. Really sucks. IDA is not heavy at all. Especially since that's the memory benchmark. Like, that's not even that's not even the miserable stress test that it comes with. No, that's the memory benchmark and it's crashing. So that tells you just how unstable that was, wasn't it? But still, it's like, I don't care. Like first you need to find a set of settings that is actually appreciably faster than stock, and then you can worry about stability testing, right? Like, that's kind of my outlook on that. So, yeah. Anyway, now I've finally said everything I wanted to say about, 3rd gen overclocking on the Godlike. And I just need to move on to some other motherboards. I guess I'll probably have to test with, well, no, we'll see. Definitely I'm going to test on Gigabyte. And then for Asus, well, I have an Asus board. It's just like, it's an X470, and I'm not sure if maybe with X570 they didn't change something. I kind of doubt it, but yeah. Anyway, like, I'll worry about that when I get there. So yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon where you can support me directly. There's also Teespring if you'd like to pick up some, like, actually hardcore overclocking merch. So, like stickers, shirts, posters, that kind of thing. So yeah, if you'd like to check that out, there's links to both of those, like both Patreon and Teespring, down in the description below. They help out immensely with running the channel because, I bought that CPU. So, if anybody was wondering where that came from, thank you, Patreon, for funding things like the CPU used for all of this testing. And actually, thank you to MSI for sending me a Godlike, which I should have mentioned at the start of the video, and Corsair for the memory kit. Yeah. Anyway, like, that kit has been in so many of my videos that at this point you should just be aware that, yeah, I have a kit from Corsair. There. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.